Picture the walls of a 1940s American city street. Between the barber shop and the corner store, posters demand your attention with bold colors and urgent messages. Loose lips sink ships, wants a sailor's profile against a sinking vessel. Uncle Sam points directly at you, insisting on your immediate enlistment. Rosie the Riveter flexes her arm with fierce determination, calling women to the factory floor. These weren't just advertisements, they were ammunition in a war fought as much on the home front as on distant battlefield. Before the war, posters sold soaps, cigarettes, and Hollywood movies. They advertised department store sales and encouraged tourism. The format was familiar, trusted, and was everywhere. People had learned to look at posters, to absorb their messages while walking to work or waiting for the bus. This existing infrastructure of public attention became invaluable when nations needed to mobilize their entire population for total war. Governments recognized that the same techniques used to sell consumer goods could convince citizens to ration food, buy war bonds, maintain secrecy, and accept the transformation of their daily lives. The transition happened very quickly. Print shops that once produced theater announcements began churning out recruitment drives. Artists who designed magazine covers found themselves tasked with visualizing abstract concepts like national duty and enemy threat. The medium stayed the same, but the stakes became matters of survival. A successful poster campaign could mean the difference between a factory meeting its production quota or falling short. It could determine whether enough men volunteered or a draft became necessary. It could keep military movements secret or expose them to enemy intelligence. This was art as a tragic weapon, though few recognized it as such at the time. Military planners tracked troop movements and armament production, but the psychological mobilization of millions happened through images pasted on city walls. These posters didn't just reflect the war effort, they shaped it, motivated it, and sustained it through years of sacrifice and uncertainty. The human mind responds to certain triggers, whether we want it or not. Fear makes us vigilant, pride makes us strive, anger makes us fight. The artists and psychologists who designed World War II propaganda posters understood these mechanisms intimately. They weren't creating art for galleries or museums. They were engineering emotional responses in millions of people simultaneously, using images that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the gut. Fear proved particularly effective. Japanese propaganda showed American cities in flames, warning citizens of imminent invasions. British posters designed German bombers overhead, reminding people that careless talk could guide enemy aircraft to their neighborhoods. American designers created images of shadowy saboteurs lurking behind factory workers, suggesting that the enemy walked among them. These weren't meant to inform, they were meant to terrify people into compliance, into silence, and into constant vigilance. The fear was deliberately amplified beyond realistic threat levels because frightened populations follow instructions without questioning them. Hatred required careful cultivation. Governments needed their citizens to see enemy soldiers not as fellow human beings, but as existential threats worthy of destruction. German posters portrayed Jewish people and Allied soldiers as vermin and monsters. American artists drew Japanese soldiers with exaggerated features, reducing them to racist caricatures. British propaganda depicted Hitler as a madman and German forces as barbaric hordes. The dehumanization was systematic and intentional. People who might hesitate to kill another person had no such qualms about eliminating a cartoonish villain or an inhuman threat. Patriotism offered a more positive channel for manipulation. Posters wrapped every request in national symbols and appeals to collective identity. Buy war bonds and you're standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers on the front. Ration your food and you're feeding the troops. Work overtime at the factory and you're building the weapons that will bring victory. The message was clear. Every action, no matter how small, connected directly to national survival. Individual sacrifice became patriotic duty, and patriotic duty became the highest form of personal identity. Different groups required different approaches. Posters aimed at women emphasized their new importance in traditionally male roles, while simultaneously appealing to maternal instincts. Rosie the Riveter showed strength and capability, but other posters reminded women that their work protected their husbands and sons overseas. The messaging had to navigate carefully between empowerment and traditional gender roles, making factory work seem both revolutionary and natural. Soldiers received propaganda designed to maintain morale and justify their sacrifice. Posters showed idealized versions of home worth fighting for, beautiful landscapes and happy families waiting for their return. Others emphasized the nobility of their cause and the evil of their enemies. The goal was to keep men fighting even when exhausted, injured, or witnessing horrors that contradicted every civilized value they'd been taught. Civilians facing rationing needed constant reassurance that their deprivation served a purpose. Posters transformed shortages into virtues. Going without butter became an action of solidarity with soldiers. Growing a victory garden became a blow against the enemy. The discomfort of daily life was reframed as active participation in warfare, making people feel powerful rather than powerless. The sophistication of this psychological manipulation varied by country and campaign, but the underlying principle remained constant. Propaganda posters didn't just convey information, they manufactured emotional states that government could harness for their purpose. The paper was cheap, the printing was simple, but the impact on human behavior was profound and measurable. Making people kill other people requires overcoming a fundamental human resistance to violence. Soldiers hesitate when they see the enemy as someone's father, brother, or son. Propaganda posters solve this problem by erasing the humanity from enemies' faces, transforming individual human beings into categories of evil that deserved elimination. The process was systematic, deliberate, and brutally effective across all warring nations. The visual tropes repeated across nations because they worked. Animal imagery removed human qualities while suggesting base instincts and lack of reason. Exaggerated physical features marked enemies as biologically different and therefore biologically inferior. Darkness and shadows suggested moral corruption and hidden evil, showing enemies harming children, women, or the elderly, established them as violators of basic human decency. These weren't subtle techniques, they were blunt instruments designed to create visceral revulsion and righteous anger. The psychological mechanism was simple but powerful. Humans naturally categorize others as either part of their group or outside it. Propaganda posters amplified this tendency to pathological extremes. They created such visual differences that empathy became nearly impossible. A civilian supporting policies that led to mass death could justify it because the victims had been rendered as something less deserving of life. The long-term damage from this dehumanization outlasted the war by decades. American racism toward Japanese people didn't end in 1945. It had been reinforced daily through images that taught an entire generation to see Asian faces as threatening. The internment of Japanese Americans became easier to justify and accept because years of propaganda had established them as potential enemies regardless of citizenship. German anti-Semitic propaganda built on centuries of prejudice and amplified it to genocidal levels, creating visual association between Jewish people and evil that persists in hate movements today. Post-war reconciliation faced enormous obstacles because populations had spent years being trained to view former enemies as fundamentally different and dangerous. Japanese and American soldiers who had fought each other struggled to see their former opponents as human even after peace was declared. German civilians who had absorbed years of Nazi racial propaganda didn't suddenly abandon those beliefs when the regime fell. The dehumanizing images had done their work too well. International relations carried the scars forward. Cold War propaganda between the United States and Soviet Union built directly on techniques perfected during World War II. Each side had learned how effectively posters could create enemy images that justified military buildup and proxy wars. The visual vocabulary of dehumanization, which was the animal comparison, the exaggerated features, and the association with disease and corruption, transferred smoothly to new adversaries. The posters also established dangerous precedents about how easily populations could be manipulated into accepting atrocities. The path from caricature to concentration camp wasn't long or complicated. Once people accepted the visual argument that certain people were less than human, policies of execution, imprisonment, and extermination followed with disturbing logic. The images made the unthinkable seem reasonable, and the horrific seem necessary. Survivors of the war's atrocities recognized these propaganda images for what they were. Concentration camp liberators saw the connection between the posters they'd grown up with and the skeletal bodies stacked like cordwood. The dehumanizing art hadn't just reflected hatred, it had manufactured it, distributed it, and normalized it until entire societies could participate in or ignore industrialized killing. The effectiveness of these posters proved that human empathy and moral reasoning are more fragile than we'd like to believe. Simple images repeated often enough can override conscience, reshape perception, and enable ordinary people to accept or commit extraordinary evil. The lesson didn't stay confined to history books. It became a template that governments, movements, and hate mongers have followed ever since. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.